I'd also like to thank Shane. He's building an open source architectural model platform, and he would really like as much contribution as possible to review the work that he's done. And it's all on the different areas of the data architecture. So we would also like this, if it's okay with you, Shane, to include it in the DAMA resource for DAMA South Africa, so that people can access it. Of course, if they need to go and or contribute or add something, that they should refer to yourself. So yes, I had a sneak peek some time back, and I was really excited about it. I think there's lots of confusion as to what we call an architecture and what we don't call an architecture. And I'm sure you'd probably address some of those areas as well, Shane. And we always know that when we get into these orchestration and pipelines, what's the right terminology? So I really like what you're doing. I think it's a great endeavor. And of course, when it's public and it's open source, I think that's even better. But thank you, Shane. Thanks for your time, and we're looking forward to hearing all about it.
No problem. Let me do the old sharing thing. Is that one up?
Yes, we can see.
Okay. All right, so I thought I'd try something slightly different with this session as well, and see if we can turn it into a discussion. So rather than a bunch of slides and presentation, I kind of want to make it as interactive as I can. So there's a fair bit of risk in this one. We'll see how it goes. So as you mentioned, I've created what I call a pattern template. Yeah, so it is a template that applies a certain pattern in a way, and it's focused on a checklist for data layer architectures. And whenever I create a template, I always open source it. Yeah, so that means anybody can pick it up, iterate it, use it, no license. Ideally, help me build it would be great. But what I'm looking for is feedback on the template as it stands, and some guidance from your community on where I should put the rest of my time. Where should I focus next? Where did it come from? Well, it came from this, right? Because I've been working in data for over 3 decades, and I've kind of seen value in layered data architectures for a long time. It's the background that I have, and it's the way we've always built them. And then the medallion quote architecture came out. And I use air quotes for architecture because, in my view, and I always have strong opinions, it's not an architecture, right? It's a pretty diagram, an incredibly successful one, right? Because if you think about the branding around layered architectures using the medallion term that has happened in our data domain over the last couple of years, it's been an epic success. But when I saw it and I started talking to people about it, and particularly when I saw a bunch of LinkedIn posts where people had LLM'd a bunch of pretty pictures to say what goes in each layer with absolutely no detail or context or anything I can use, I went into my unhappy space. And so this is what happens when I go into my unhappy space, is I look at something and I rant to myself, that marketing medallion architecture, what a lot of bull dust it was. And then I go have a beer, have some coffee, and then I kind of talk to myself and say, okay, well, if I'm unhappy about it, what can I do to fix it? And so that's where the template came from, was actually, if we wanted some more detail on what the checklist for an architecture is, what goes where, what the rules, so what are the principles, the policies, and the patterns that are applicable, how would I document that? Yeah, because in the past when I worked with customers, I'd create a blueprint document, and all that context around what can go where is in many pages and lots of words and diagrams, and I can distill it back because I wrote it, but I wasn't sure anybody else could. So that's why I worked on the template, and I've tested it over the last year or two with different organizations and in different places to see what was valuable. But what I keep coming back to was, what problem am I trying to solve? And so the one I think has the most value is this one, and this is what I want to test with the community today. If you go into a new organization as either a data team member or a consultant or whatever, it is quite difficult in my experience to get a view of that data domain, that data platform. And particularly, it's harder around the language. So if there is a layered architecture, people will use different terms for the layers. They may use bronze, silver, gold, or they may use raw, designed, and presentation. Yeah, they may actually have 5 layers. They may have 3. Every organization kind of builds the same thing, but in different ways with different terms based on their context. And when you want to understand what it looks like, it's either in people's heads, it's in the code, it's in a wiki or a Confluence page or a Google Doc or a Word doc somewhere, or Teams or SharePoint. So it's kind of all over the place. And to get this view of what the rules are is incredibly difficult. So that's the problem space that the template is trying to fix. So as I said, it's open source. So I built it in Google Sheets. Yeah, so it is just a Google Sheet template. And if I'll have the link at the end so everybody can go and grab a copy if they want to. And it's basically a Google Sheet with some rows and some columns. Go, Howard.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind putting it on now so people can start looking at it as you're talking. Maybe that would be more helpful. I don't know if anyone's got, I mean, there we go. Fantastic.
So if anybody wants to QR to it now, that'll take you to the web page, and then from there you can open the link to the Google Sheet.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Thanks, Shane.
And actually, I'll put the link.
Yeah, that's great. If we can put it into the chat, that would be fantastic.
Cool. All right. So what I normally do is I normally go through the template, right? And I kind of talk about what's where and all that kind of stuff. But I want to try something different today with the audience. Yeah. So I got me friend Claude, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab an Excel version of the template. So what I did was, let me get the tokens going. I just basically grabbed the Google Sheet version and exported it as Excel, and now I'm just uploading it. Yeah. And so what I'm looking for is what is this template?
Whilst it's thinking there, Shane, the question I wanted to ask you is almost, do you have like a definition which could say, okay, this is what an architecture is, this is what an architecture isn't. How do you define bull dust? How do you define what's right, what's wrong? What is your, I mean, there is a nice architectural definition from ISO, but I'd love to understand what your view, what your, I wouldn't say simplistic view is, that would be going to.
Oh, that's a damn good question. I've never really given myself a clear definition for that. I mean, I always go back to architectural patterns and the pattern book by Christopher Alexander around designs for houses. And so for me, an architecture is a blueprint where there are places that have rules. That's kind of how I think about it. But yeah, I haven't actually looked at, all the other definitions to see whether I'm actually complying with them or not. Right. Good question. Okay, so it's basically looked at the template and it's come back and said there's a bunch of tabs, right? And so the first tab it's told me is there's some light instructions, right? How you actually use it. And again, I need some iterations on that where people tell me those instructions aren't clear. It said there's a template. So what happens is there is a blank template that people can use to fill out their checklist, and they can add more columns if they want more layers. Yeah. And then everything is as close to a drop down as I can make it. Right. So I'm starting to codify the things that I see when I work with organizations and teams that could go in those boxes. Right. It's then saying there's a dictionary. So what I've done is had an attempt that for each of those each of those values that you can pick, I've had an attempt at creating a definition for them. And to be clear, I've LLM'd all the way on these, right? So I've kind of used ChatGPT, I think, to try and give me a definition for each of the lookups. And then there's an example. Oh, sorry, no, there's the lookup tab. So then there is a bunch of lookups, yeah, which is how I'm driving the template itself. So when you click on there, it is now looking up that area. So if you want to extend out the options that you have, you just add them to the lookups, yeah, and those drop-down boxes will automatically pick it up. And then the last thing it tells me is there's an Agile data example. And so what I've done is I've taken the data architecture that we have in our platform, and I have used the template to document it. Yeah, so this is how I test it. I go, what do we allow to happen in each of our data layers? What are the PII rules? What are the persistence rules? So that is an example based on what we do. And so if I use that, I might be able to say something like, in Agile data, what layer can I change column names to make them pretty? Well, actually, let's not say pretty. Let's say business related, right? So one of the questions I, when I first go into an organization with an architecture I haven't seen is, where can I rename things? So I've got a column, cust_d. When can I make it customer ID? Yeah. And so what Claude's trying to do is go, okay, looking at the rename fields row, so it found that row because it just is good at that language. It's saying driven by storage, driven by storage, driven by context, and it's ticked that. Yeah, and I'm like, well, what does that actually mean? Yeah. So I need to change column cust D into customer ID in my data. Right, and so now it's being a little bit more specific for me, yeah? Because it's going, well, in the Agile data architecture, we do that in the designed layer. So if I just go back to the template, you can see here that our naming for our layers is we call our left-hand layer landing, then we have a history, then a design, then a consume, then a cached, and then a last mile. That's the language we use internally. What I have is all the aliases, yeah? So sometimes I will see people call that landing or loading dock or raw. But if you think about the medallion architecture, and I'm going to keep using the things, if you talk about medallion, I align our landing and our history with their definition of bronze. Yeah, so what I'm doing is a language mapping. Yeah. And then if it said rename fields, then that's the comp row it's looking at. And it's basically, I'm saying that in the designed layer, that is where you can rename fields based on business context. Yeah. Down here, you only rename them if there's a requirement from storage. Yeah. So if I'm moving the data from a certain file structure to another file structure and that column name has something that's invalid on the target storage mechanism, then I'm allowed to rename it. But I'm not allowed to rename it for business purposes. Does that make sense?
There is a question by William.
Cool. Let's go. I love questions.
So on this, I'm not sure if I heard you correctly. On this particular slide here with the data and the information, was any of this extracted for you, or did you build it from your knowledge of either business analysts providing the information or everything else relating to it, or how did you get this information into this template in the first place?
So for this example, it's based on a platform for our product that we've built with my co-founder. So I know the answers, so I put them in manually. When I'm working with a new organization and we're using this, then it's based on knowledge of humans. So they're filling it out and arguing often about what goes where. I haven't got to the stage yet where we could automate that. And that would be interesting because we'd have to go, potentially, could we go and look at the code that's been executed to see where renamings are actually happening and why? Yeah, we could look at the logs, we could look at the wiki or the documentation and infer this as a starter for 10. But I haven't tried that. I haven't got to that level of maturity yet.
Yeah, sure. I think the challenge is this is your source quality, so you need to know it's good, right?
Yeah. So normally it's a domain expert. Normally, it's your you've got a data architect or a platform architect or a lead staff engineer. They're the ones that typically know what the rules are. Hopefully, Again, I have worked for a number of organizations that don't actually know what the rules are, and everybody does anything they want anywhere. And if that is your architecture, if that's your strategy, that's okay, right? Just say in here, anything, anywhere. But I often find that's not what people think's happening.
So Shane, the problem that I tend to run into is managers are a different kind of creature. And managers like to have space to be able to make their decisions. They don't like to be constricted. And so there's this tension that runs between getting rules done and them actually not wanting to have a rule there, because it gives them, flexibility to adjust this and adjust that, etc. But that's just as an aside. It creates a challenge when you're trying to extract things.
Yeah, I mean, then just change the template to allow them to select multiple things, and they can click all. And then at least then, when you look at it at the template in an organization and everything's being ticked as allowed, right? The principles and policies and patterns are anything goes. Then at least you know what you're dealing with. You're not going to ask, well, how do we manage PII? It's like any way you want to. Yeah, I probably wouldn't carry on working with them either, because I'm, again, opinionated that I kind of want some rules in place, otherwise it is the Wild West.
Yeah.
Okay, so as an experiment, I'm kind of interested. Like, if you think about, it's got a whole lot of things that it's documenting as the rules. But I want to see actually how useful it is, those rules are. So in the chat, people, if you want to put some questions in there, I'll just ask Claude, and then we'll see what it responds with, and we'll flip back to the template and have a chat about what Claude picked up, and was that valuable? Was it not? Have I got the right stuff? Have I not? So if you think about walking into a new org or your current org, what things do you always want to know about the data layered architecture before you start using it or coding it? You may be an analyst and want to know what lives where, or you may be, platform person that want to know what technologies are being used. You may be a developer that wants to know, if I'm going to go and apply a metric, where is it? Just type it in the chat, and then I can cut and paste it into Claude, and we'll see how we go and have a conversation about it. Is there a question there for me?
Yeah, so there is CP. Let me, Corne, is that Corne? Yes, Corne.
Yes, it's me. Shane, I just want to know, do you mean questions for your agile data example or for the template in general?
I'm going to use it against the agile data example to see what response we get, to then test the template.
Got it.
Makes sense. But if you've got questions about the template, just ask them now verbally, and then I should be able to answer them, or not. Always good. So I'm just going to go, let's grab this one. I'd like to understand the latency capabilities, right? Again, this is all live, right? I got no idea what the hell's going to happen. So, and hopefully I won't run out of tokens. Okay, so basically saying data processing row, yeah? Okay, and so if I go across there, it's got, where's my data processing row? Data processing row here, right? So what it's done is said, okay, I'm defining some patterns of what's allowed. So in the landing, we're allowed to batch, micro batch, or stream data in. But then for the rest of our platform, we support a micro batch pattern, so up to 15-minute refreshes from landing all the way through to last mile. But anything faster than that, we don't actually support particularly well, right? So we're like, nah, you can't stream all the way through yet. We just haven't built that. But what's interesting is I thought I had something in there around a form of SLA, data sync requirements. And I don't. Right, so in my head, what I think we need in there is a form of latency, if that's what you're talking about, is from when the data turns up to when it is available. But the problem then is that becomes specific around the type of data. Yeah, and so with the checklist, one of the things I struggled with is the grain of the checklist, right? At the moment, the grain is at these layers, and then a policy or principle or pattern for each layer, not at a level of each data source. Does that make sense? Oh, you're on mute.
So what I always like to do is almost start from a business requirement. So for example, we want to reduce the latency of the the chatbot or the latency of the claim, whatever it is, the claim processing or anomaly detection. I want to be able to ensure that we get like a 20-second latency max. So how would I go about discussing this with the spreadsheet?
Oh, okay. So what
And I
I would
like the
do,
SLA, and I like the almost linking it to a business requirement. The business requirement needs to make a decision in 5 seconds or whatever it is on a new claim. How would I?
yeah. So let's do it the way that I would do it manually, right?
Right.
So what I would do is look at that data processing, and I know that when I've defined micro batch, I've defined that as 15 minutes or less, or 15 minutes or more. Yeah, that's
Okay.
the definition I've given it to it. Now, what would be really interesting is to see if I come in here and whether I have actually documented that in the dictionary. Because again, that's what I know. Okay, there we go. So data is processed in small frequent batches at short intervals. But I haven't actually defined in this checklist what a short interval is, right? So what I would do for my version is I should update that to say it can be processed up to 15 minutes or more, but can't be less. Yeah.
Right. So
And
would
then,
you define a sort of by batch? This is the time frame. By micro batch, by streaming, you would give the sort of possible latencies that we'd experience in those different types.
Yeah. Yeah. But let's actually see what Claude does, because I got no idea, right? So I have a need to have data from landing to last mile in less than 1 minute. What do I need to change in my architecture?
Okay.
So remember, this is Claude's magic off the stuff I'm giving it, right? None of this is anything I've written. There is no skill, there is no prompt for Claude right now. I'm just using its generic Sonnet 4.6 chat. If I was going to use Claude against the template, I'd give it a lot more hints. Yeah, of where to look. Yeah. So okay. There you go. I mean, data processing, micro batch across all layers. You're going to have to fix that. See, it says typically runs 5 to 15 minutes windows at best, but I've not defined that in the template.
So where did it get that from? Industry benchmarks or the definition of?
It's Claude.
Could you ask it if you ask it? Could you ask it why did you suggest 5 to 15?
And so, yeah, essentially, like, because I've worked in the space for a while, I've always used 15 minutes. Maybe it's just institutional knowledge.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, if you're using the checklist and you pick micro batch, and by micro batch you mean 30 minutes is the max, that the minimum amount of movement time, then you're going to have to actually change the template, right? Because everybody may think the way I think. All right, and then it said data persistence, right? So there is a line in here around data persistence. And so what I often want to know is which layer is physically storing data and which one is just made up of views or cached or both is possible. Yeah. So you can see in our one that we persist our landing, we persist our history. We treat those as immutable, right? We never delete those layers or that data. That is the data we can never get back. So we treat that as our pet. After that, we allow ourselves to persist, virtualize, blow it away, rebuild it whenever we want to. And that's our architecture, right? But I will often work with teams that their designed layer, their silver, their transforms is persisted, right? They do things and they don't want to be able to blow it away and rebuild it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So those are the rules. What else did it say? Physical data structure. So we use in our design layer, we use a version of Data Vault modeling, not the Data Vault methodology and activity schema at the moment. Okay, and they're basically saying those data modeling techniques are hard to make sub-minute. And I'd agree with that, right? I'd go, if I have to have a almost streaming methodology, I'd probably want to add another modeling pattern in that layer, potentially. Yep. And then change detection. It's already got change streaming for landing, so we're okay for there. Destructive rebuilds. Again, so destructive rebuilds for us in history is allowed as an exception. So where's destructive rebuilds? Yeah. So we say landing, we're not allowed to rebuild that. History, we don't do it, but every now and again we need to break that rule. But we're allowed to do destructive rebuilds through the other layers. Yeah. So I can blow away some structures and rebuild it from scratch when I feel like it. So it's going, if I'm rebuilding a big table and we're streaming, then that table won't be available, and therefore you're not getting your sub 20 seconds. Right, and then it's been honest. I love it when it's honest. Basically, don't stream, which is the right answer, because we have not built our platform to deal with the streaming use case in a robust way. Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Questions?
There's another question from Cornet.
Okay. Oh, nice question. Now, it's going to be interesting to see what it defines as business logic as well. Yeah, that's a good one, actually, is the derived data. So at the moment, we still do our metric definitions either in design or consume. We still do quite a few of them in consume when we're trying to get patterns to push it back to design. So that's the first one it picked up, calculated metrics. Yep. And one of the things it's saying is design says facts, measures, and metrics. Again, as part of the template, I have a glossary or a language that I'm using. That is what I use when I teach teams. And so the language I use is a fact is a value that I can see in the physical data. It's immutable, right? I can look at a table, I'll see a number, that is a fact. A measure for me, my definition is it's where we use a formula that does basic calculations, average, sum, count. And a metric for me is where we have a complex calculation where it's this divided by that, or this over that, or lag or window, any kind of complex one that kind of looks like a metric. That's the language that I use. But again, if somebody's using the template and they have their own language, they just need to update the template to use their language.
And Shane, sorry, would you suggest that instead of updating it, it would be better to create a synonym on that?
You can create synonyms or aliases on the name of the layers.
Right.
Yeah, I've built that in.
Okay.
But I haven't built in the ability to do synonyms on the values.
Okay.
I'm not sure how I'd do that in the Google Sheet.
I would think that in your dictionary, in the dictionary where you have it, you could have synonyms on the dictionary.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that Claude is good at looking at every tab and starting to create this relational model of that, right? But as a human, me coming in here and going, what is it? I don't know. We don't call them data engineers. We call them data whatever. Then how do I show that? Or do I have to actually go across to the dictionary and then find the alias, right? That cognition for me to use that data myself, not with Claude, is a little bit less. But yeah, maybe the answer is if I add in the aliases, then Claude will be able to pick up those aliases in that language better. Yeah, good call.
It would actually be quite nice to build almost a semantic model on these things as to which frameworks with different terminology and understand that meaning of what you're referring to. Because what I was thinking of is, for example, we have a functionality like event streaming or an ESB, and then what's our examples of that, so that we can then start off at a level, say this is the type of form function we need, and then what would be the actual example?
Yeah, and then I can just naturally, I'm going to go to, well, let's create the documentation that explains some of these concepts to people who don't know them, either internally or externally, because, you know, what does native storage format actually mean? Like, I know what I defined it as because I did it. But, and then can we then link it back to industry knowledge bases where we go, well, actually, if you go over here, this is what it's called. If you go over here, these are the sources of truth for these definitions of these things. So I can see it going all the way down there. I just don't think I can do it in a Google Sheet, and I'm trying not to build an app for it, because then it's not open source anymore as such. It becomes it's not transportable. You can't just take the Google Sheet and do whatever you want to it. You're now bound to this app, and I think that's a constraint, but maybe not. Another question. Oh, sorry. There's a question. Can we do multi-stakeholder drop-downs? Yes. It's just Google Sheets, so you can go and select multiple. Yeah, because that's just a Google Sheet function.
Can you just go through to your dictionary quickly? So one of the key things is obviously the ongoing governance of this, right? Which means who changed what, when, who approved it, and where did they get it from? What was their source? So those would be important columns that you need to add in there.
Yeah, and so then, yeah, we could bring in status. So is it, you know, draft or approved? Who approved it? Any kind of change control on it, those where the Google Sheet breaks again. Unless I can find, somebody can help me find a way to have Google Sheet version updates to it. And then again, as I said, then it keeps bringing me back to creating an app for it. But my view is,
no, you don't want to go there at this stage. I get it. Just make sure that you add the
William,
source, right?
Sorry, William. William, could I just ask, could we just finish off the answer to the business logic question and just confirm that that's an acceptable, so I'd love to hear Cornet's feedback on, well, this is what's come back.
Well, yeah, Mike, I asked that question because that's typically the answer I get from layered architecture is it's sometimes ambiguous where you can do what. So it's a normal issue. So it was just interesting for me to see. I think it's very useful if the LLM can supply this type of answer, then you can tweak the template to make sure that it's less ambiguous. So yeah, I'd like to answer.
Oh, actually, because I haven't really done it with Claude this way before, right? Like I said, I normally just present the template and go through some examples. But what would be interesting is to create a set of test questions that we could put through an LLM using the template as the input, and then see if we get consistent answers, or if even better, as the architect, if I put the question in and it gives me back the answer that I would tell the person who asked me, then I know the template is right. That is
exactly.
Point.
Yeah.
I hadn't thought about
of course, Claude is learning, right?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, if I was going to expose any kind of LLM to the people that are looking for the answers based on the template, I would be using prompts or skills or something to tune it to give the right answer.
I think that using a skills or an agent to just learn, I think that's where it grows. Right?
And so from an open source point of view, what we want to do is create those skills and combine them with the template, because that packages the value for somebody to use it, isn't it? That's a great idea.
So Shane, if I was to ask, let's say, I mean, of course, we always talk about, okay, you've got this business requirement and we want to ensure that our architecture reflects the business requirement and can deal with it, whichever that business requirement may be. So would you be able to say, okay, these are the set of business requirements, what would my configuration look like? What would my options look like across these different areas?
That's a good question. I'm not sure it's got enough detail for that, but that is a good question. Bear with me, caller, for a second. Let me see if I've got something I can. Because yeah, I'd have to see what a requirement is, and then see if it did it. But why don't I grab this? So this is a example information product canvas that I had in the book.
Right.
I see one thing I love about LLMs is I don't have to spell properly anymore.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, so what I did was I had a canvas out of my book, which is an example. So it's got like business questions, actions and outcomes, personas, core business events, features that are required, scope statements and that. And I just basically uploaded an image of that canvas and then said, what do I need to change? So in theory, Claude's now comparing the requirements of that canvas for that product against the architecture. Okay, so it's basically saying I've got a bunch of calculated derived objects, and so I'm going to go and join some data in the designed layer. Yeah, it's pulled out the calculated metrics out of the canvas and said, so it's kind of telling me where to put it, where to do the work, but not what I need to change.
Right, right.
I mean, if I changed the template and had nowhere that allowed derived data, like it was an operational data store architecture, then in theory it'll come back and go, you've got nowhere to derive data, you're screwed, right?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, it has picked up custody to customer ID, right? So the Claude memory of where I told it about a field a while ago is now coming through, and I made that up. So like the LLMs are dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. Yeah. So now the interesting one is the persona access. So this one basically, I think there's a requirement to push the data to an operational system as an actionable outcome. And then nowhere in my architecture have I said listed a operational system as a last mile tool. And actually that is a gap, right? Is that I've treated all the examples on the last mile tools as being kind of data tools, BI tools, data tools, not Salesforce, HubSpot, vibe coded that. So that's a gap. Yeah.
And what happens if I do things like masking? Depending on the roles, how would I handle the different maskings at that last mile level?
Okay. Where would I do fine-grained security to mask data from a persona?
Yeah.
Okay. So again, remember, I'm kind of interpreting what you're telling me, and then I'm kind of writing an architect's question because I'm giving a hint: fine-grained security, masking, persona. Right? I'm not being a consumer. Like I'm not being a non-data person. Right. There you go. So the first thing it's done is contains PII. So one of the ones that came out was, do these layers actually contain PII data?
Right.
Because often if we have a technique where we mask it at a certain layer from then forward, we say it should never have it. Yeah. And based on what you were doing, Howard, with policy as code, I'm thinking, well, why can't I now actually have a system that tests that these rules are being honored or not?
Right.
Kind of where my head was going to long term. Okay, so it's saying, well, there you go. I'm allowed PII in any of the layers, and one of the options was masked, right? So I can say that and consume. It'll hold it, but it has to be masked. I can't have raw PII data sitting there. Now, what it's also done is picked up who can access it, right? So when I do my blueprints, one of the things people get confused about is what persona in the organization is allowed to access that layer. Can a data scientist go back to the raw data and do whatever they want or not? Yeah. And so I assigned some persona roles, right? About who can read it and who can write it. This system account one is an epic failure. I haven't got this right. It's like, well, actually, an engineer can't write to this layer using their account. They have to use a trusted account to write a production service effectively. But that's not clear, right? So the differentiation between can I read it and can I write to it in a layer is clear, but how I write to it is not. So that row, in my opinion, based on the testing, the conversations I've had, needs to change, right? I need to have a different left-hand side, a different principle, pattern, or policy term to make it clearer about what persona is allowed to play in that area, but what accounts are actually allowed to write the work. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah, and I don't have an answer for that one, right? Again, I'm looking for help because it's like, I know that's a problem. You need to go and solve that. So what I was doing is taking both the PAI and the persona role and applying that in its answer to go, yep. Again, complexity. If we had a persona or a business unit, so, sales can see the name, but customer support can see the name, but sales can't, right? That high level of grain of these policies, the Google Sheet's going to blow out, I think. It's now a many-to-many problem and it won't survive.
So would it be possible, as an example, if we build policies and then basically instead of just giving Claude the Google Sheet, but you'd give it the Google Sheet plus your policies, and that would help control the answer?
Yeah, and we could even put, because the policies are just text, right? I mean, in theory, we could say, if I say contains PII and consume is mask and yes, then we have a link to the policies of what it means when who can see it when it is held there and who can see it when it's masked, and what is the pattern for masking. That text could be useful.
Could we maybe just go back to the people? Are there any other questions? I feel like there's maybe one or two of us asking questions. And William, wait, just William, one moment. Let me see if I can get some questions from other people, and then we'll be back to you. Mr. Nolte, I'd love to see. Mark, you've been an architect for a while. How are you finding this?
I'm fascinated by the use of uploading the template and then interrogating it with Claude. Now, I just honestly, I've been in a thought bubble here for the last 10 minutes thinking about how I can apply this in what I'm doing.
Right. Okay.
Somebody I know took the template and got one of the LLMs to generate a diagram of the estate. So it actually became an A3 diagram with the layers and then kind of boxes for what was allowed in that. It told a story. I'm not sure it told a perfect story, but it was a good start.
And maybe to ask Remco, if you always have those questions on where to put some of the data vaults areas. Is that something, you say you love how it's evolved. Have you made use of these type of things, Remco? Remco's quiet. It's not often. Maybe he can't talk.
I think he said he was going to be on a train today. So I think
okay. All right. Okay. A rare occasion. Anybody else? Any other questions, comments? We'd love to hear that, and then we'll get back to William. Sorry to hold you on, William.
On a tablet, yeah.
We have an arrangement, Howard. It's fine.
Okay, thank you. I'd love to give some other people a chance just to ask questions. I know that's Adam, you normally have some good insights. Adam, any questions from your side?
Not necessarily. Well, I suppose a bit about the layers. So it'd just be to ask what data duplication there is between the layers.
Okay.
Oh, that's a good question. I'm not sure I've given enough information for that, so I'm going to be intrigued to see where it's going to come back on that one.
And Shane, would you also deal with things like aggregation, where to aggregate the data to remove some of the PII if the person's those type of challenges?
All right, let me see what this says about duplication. Okay, so what it's doing is, so our landing and our history are duplicates of the data. The way we do it is our landing is Google Cloud Storage and our history is Google BigQuery. So we land the data in cloud storage and then we ingest it into BigQuery for a whole bunch of technical reasons. So it's inferred that based on the modeling that it's source driven, that it's using a native object and that the physical data structures match the source system, which is how we model that layer, and it contains PII. It's guessing that we're duplicating the layer, the data in each of those layers, which we are. Yeah, but I haven't told it that. So that's an interesting inference it's got. And then it's saying history to design less duplication. That's true. And what it's doing is it's inferring by the fact that we're changing the shape. Yeah, by the fact that we are, where is it? We're moving to data vault and activity schema and one big table and dimensional, and that we're driven by business context, not by storage, and that we can derive data, and that we're introducing facts, measures, and metrics, and that I thought it would have picked this one up because what we're saying is in our landing in history, we should be able to reconcile the source, but once we design it and change it, then it's a lot harder. And so I thought it would have picked that up, but it hasn't. So yeah, again, it's just interesting which rows it's using from the architecture checklist to answer those questions. So maybe we'd introduce a row which is percentage of duplication as a hint, if people ask that all the time. Or is this good enough to give me the hint? Yeah, I don't know the answer to those two questions I asked myself. Sorry, Howard, what was the one that you had that I kind of stopped when I went back to that one?
So what I was talking, I mean, a lot of times some of the business requirements I help businesses deal with is the scenario of archiving the data, getting it into a data warehouse, getting it out of the applications, and then when necessary in terms of the retention schedule to aggregate data and to remove some of the underlying rows that you may be keeping. So it's almost that process that we go through of moving the data along the periods.
So what's really interesting about this experiment right now is normally when I use the template and I'm showing people and you ask me that question, I've got to go on the template and try to remember which bloody row I used to answer that question or if I did or not, right? And I forget because I don't iterate this very often. I come back to it when I need to. What's really interesting using Claude is I can just ask it and then I can go and check whether that's where I think I'm doing it. So what it's saying, no, we can't aggregate in landing or history or design, and that's true. We can aggregate and consume. We can't aggregate in cache, that's not quite true. And we can aggregate in last mile if we have to. Whereas what I'd like to see actually is that say you can aggregate in last mile, so your end user tool, you know, your Power BI or your Tableau, but that's if you have no choice. Yeah, we want to push left. And so I'd actually like a hint that you're allowed to do it, but it's an exception, not a rule. And then basically it's saying you've defined facts, measures, and metrics, but you haven't defined aggregation.
Yeah.
So that's fair. I haven't. I mean, I'm not. Yeah. Okay. And so maybe grain change allowed. That's Okay, so now what it's doing is starting to give me a hint on the template changes I need to answer that question accurately.
Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't even asked it to do that. This stuff freaks me out sometimes. It's like, well, that's actually a bloody good idea. I should have thought of that. Otherwise, I'm not going to get paid so much. Okay, let's ask the next one. Capacity planning.
So we've got Remco asking, I would be curious to see if my modeling assistant will connect LLM. Interesting to dive into this separately and come back to the group. Okay, that's the one.
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, I think if you can augment all these different patterns together, right, you're going to get a better response. Okay, one of the questions in there was capacity planning. Okay, so it's basically saying there's some signals in there for capacity planning, but not enough because it doesn't have any of the operational data. Okay, about estimating where the big bucket of costs are. So this will be an interesting one because our architecture is really driven by minimizing costs. So what happens for us is we charge on a subscription basis and we pay for the Google Cloud infrastructure costs, not our customers. So they have a fixed monthly fee and we pay for all the infrastructure costs. So we're hyper focused on making sure that that cost is low and doesn't spike on us. So a lot of our architecture decisions, so that decision of having data come into Google Cloud Storage is landing and then get it into BigQuery and history. That is driven by the fact that for the last 7 years, that is a free service for us. We don't pay for BigQuery compute if you do that. And Google changes things on a regular basis, so we may have to re-architect at some stage. So a lot of our layers and our decisions on our principles, policies, and patterns are based around that cost model. So I'm intrigued to see whether it would pick up that kind of inference from the limited data it has.
Right.
And what's it doing? So history and design are both indefinite. They're larger storage buckets. Yeah, that's not actually true because landing is transient, but we do store it as immutable. So that's interesting. I haven't put, that's not coming out through the template. So micro batch is the biggest compute bucket. No, it's not actually, it's query, because the way we use BigQuery on demand, and the way we do the ETL, it's really effective. Our last mile query tools are the things that are our biggest bucket. The pub sub, yep, that's a different price model. Yeah, it's picked up Google BI Engine Cache, which is a fixed monthly fee that gives us a reduction in our query costs.
Well,
yeah, so it's close, but I haven't given it enough hints to really point where our cost bucket is. But it wouldn't be hard to add that context into the checklist template somewhere, somehow. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, here we go. Here's a good one. Are there any gaps, issues, and risks? Oh, nice. That is a good question. Let me just whack that one in there. Yeah, it's actually an interesting one. Is that, like I said, I've been working on it a while. I've been trying to get people to kind of help me because I prefer to work with others, and I find that feedback is much better. I haven't actually bothered to get my LLM friend to be my co-designer with me. Yeah, I'm not sure I trust it enough world experience, but yeah. So no latency SLA, freshness targets. Yep, that's fair. No masking patterns. So that's what you said, Howard, putting the policy or the pattern around how we mask it. Or per persona masking rules. You said is a missing one. No data duplication or single source of truth. Yeah. Okay. Aggregation, grain change. Yep, that one is missing. No volume growth or estimation. Yeah, I mean, we could put small, medium, large if we define what they are, 10 gig, 100 gig, terabyte, petabyte. as a way of giving it information that's useful. And then my instructions still have, please write these notes up properly, Shane. Yep. Good question. Thank you, Julian. And
Brilliant.
then let's see about new patterns. Yeah.
I'm so glad that that I waited, because you've actually modeled part of my answer. The way you have interacted and said, okay, yes, but that isn't there, and that is there, and etc., etc., etc. Because my question is really, if you go back to before we had this tool, we'd have to sit down and do a really good piece of work in our mind to look for the black holes. I'm maybe abusing your terminology, Howard, but to look for those places that actually are gaps that nobody else has seen, that the inference wouldn't really necessarily see. To your point, you haven't necessarily given it the information that it needs to be able to do that inference. So is this something that you do after you've done done this work with Claude, and intentionally then go and do a human review afterwards, kind of the way we used to do before? Or have you found that you do less of that because you're almost generating a better and better relationship with Claude?
So this is the first time I've used Claude to interact with the template. I don't know why, because I've been using ChatGPT and Claude for a few years now. I've used ChatGPT to try and visualize the template, and I've used it to give me definitions of the lookup values based on, because it's got effectively a bunch of projects now that have been trained to act like me. But this is the first time I've actually interacted with something like Claude using the template to answer questions about the architecture and try and find out what's missing on that template. So until then, it's just been me and a bunch of other humans giving it a bash and going, well, based on this architecture that we have at this customer or this organization, and this question that I always want to know the answer to, is it there or not?
Yeah, that's interesting, Shane. So I think what has to happen is that you almost got to go at the end of the day and have a kind of break your relationship with Claude and say, well, we'll start again from scratch tomorrow. I'm not making you my best friend yet, right? Because otherwise you're going to have that hallucination on your own side as a consequence of trusting Claude too much.
Yeah, but I think what's been interesting out of this experiment for me is, until now, when I had this problem statement, I would say, go check the checklist. But to use the checklist, you actually had to be the person that created the checklist, or you needed to understand it, because you needed to know which row and which response gave you the answer you wanted.
Yes.
What I think today's proven for me is, by pairing the template with any LLM, it reduces the level of cognition that you need to understand your architecture if it's giving you accurate answers.
And I suppose it increases that requirement for cognition of the things that it didn't raise, right?
Yeah. I mean,
nice.
Ideally, the question would be, for me, how could lots of people do what I just did? And then how could we feed that back where the gaps are back into updating the template? And I don't know. Yeah. I don't know how to do that, right? Because that's like wisdom of the crowd. But how do I get the signal from the noise, or get other people to help do that?
Brilliant. Thanks. It's been very interesting.
Cool. Right. So there's another question here.
Shane, while you're doing that, there's a question from Chantal in terms of, where do you define the metadata columns required per layer and the rules around the content in those columns? Load, timestamps, surrogate keys, audit keys.
Ooh, yeah, the pattern or the standards. I don't see how I could put them into that template, into that Google Sheet template, without breaking the grain of the template. But I think I'll go back to your point, Howard, where if we had places that the policies for each of those cells could be bound, then the standards for each of those cells could be bound. Even like the naming stand, or the standards for column naming, camel case, whatever. yeah, you could, that's a pattern or a policy, right? This is the standard that has to be applied. And in
Right.
this layer, you know, in the designed layer in BigQuery using Data Vault, then it's sat underscore or underscore sat, you know, that would be how I'd do it. And again, when it's, as a human, the cognition to be able to jump between that cell and then the dictionary and then the policy and then the standards is quite a lot for me to do to make those jumps and find what I'm looking for. But potentially putting it into an LLM, it may do that connection for us. That's a really good question. Yeah. Right. There was a question there around GDPR. Okay, so coming from New Zealand, we have no rules around the use of people's data, and in fact, one of the core health platforms got breached, and 450,000 images of patients got leaked, and the company is still the largest health data platform in New Zealand, and the director of that company is still operating his business. So I will say that when it comes to PII, I have a lot of work to do to kind of catch up to the European standards, because we never really had to deal with it when I was working in that country.
Shane, the context of the question is not so much in like finding a gap there, but it's in actually saying that I think as long as you keep asking Claude, it will keep coming back with answers, because it will reinforce your point. I'm sure I can rephrase that a bit different, and it will again say, oh, you're right, maybe I should change it to this. So I think the point I'm making is that you can forever ask it to, like if you ask it now, are you sure about that? Maybe there's an even more accurate way. It will probably just do it again. So at some point you have to trust yourself, and what, like, where's that boundary of not going into this endless loop of trusting what the LLM says.
Yeah, and so again, I'm not trying to say that the LLM is the answer, right? That, you know, get an LLM, put it on top of the template, and then you don't need architects or people with architecture skills, sorry, because we have to define those layers and we have to architect them and you know, find ones that fit the context of the organization, the data, and the use cases. But what I'm saying is potentially the coupling of the LLM with the template has value, and us being able to explore that template. Because I go back to whenever I've done this session before, people have struggled with columns, rows, what does change detection mean? What are each of these options? Yeah, like the ability to understand all the language around each of those, because it's my language, based on a form of standardized language, I think, but I've never proven that. That context and cognition was too high. So yeah, I get your point, right? We can't, it's not a magic box, right? You can't just define the template, put it into Claude, and then expect not to have to do any of the work.
Yeah, I think the question is, we have, like, what is that magic balance between using large language models to help us versus where do we actually have to still step in and have a human in the loop?
Yeah, and my answer is, at the moment, if you're doing anything with an LLM, you should have a human in the loop. It's it's like until you know that it's gone from probabilistic to deterministic, or the blast radius of it making a mistake and you not catching it is negligible. So it depends on that use case. Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
William, just checking if you got a last question.
Yeah, you know what? It just reminds me how we've got to remember that we're training Claude while we're doing this, right? And
which is a good thing.
Yeah, it's a good thing, but you need to be intentional about it, right? Sometimes we, for example, with our kids, we just give them latitude sometimes, and then we don't give them latitude other times, etc. As the user of the LLM, we have to be intentionally strict about making sure that it continuously realizes where the boundaries are. Otherwise, it's going to have a challenge. And of course, if our boundaries are all different, that doesn't help it at all, right?
But I think, William, that we can start progressing in terms of skills development, specialized agents that provide certain answers, and there we start to get more learning and control. So we don't need to leave it at the LLM level and just hope that it gives us the right answer. We can be a lot more specialized.
100%. And I think Howard, the work that you're doing on the AI thing every week is bringing that out and honing it and getting us to a point whereby we can say, okay, we're starting to understand what this creature really is and how to really work with it. So I think that's a good thing. But hey, it's early days and it's rough waters, so we just keep swimming, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I just tried to tell it that personal data is not broader than PII. And it's like, wow, you're kind of right now, even though it told me I was wrong before. So, you can bully the LLMs to repeat what you want it to repeat a lot of the times, and that's dangerous.
And but there was another thing that's coming in, and that's that context mesh, Shane, where when people do the override, it's about then providing the rationale and the signals as to why they did that override. So you could be storing the knowledge about the decisions on making these decisions so that other people get benefit out of it.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we do is when we're using an agent that we've built, originally we were logging the question and the answer. And then what we found was when we saw an interesting answer, we wanted to know which reasoning path the LLM had taken to get that answer. And we'd go back and ask the same question. And of course, we get a slightly different answer. And then, because, we're dealing with it where it's a helper, it assists us, it doesn't do the job for us. So what we ended up working out really quickly is that actually we now log the question, the answer, and the reasoning path. And the reasoning path is the gold. So if I was going to harden up a set of skills for Claude to use the template, I'd also be forcing it to log the question, the answer, the reasoning path. And then I'd use that log as an input to another LLM process to say what questions are asked all the time and what answers are common. And I'd use that as a thing for me to use my brain to look at and go, okay, this area over here, lots of people are asking about it. And actually we either haven't captured the information at all, the context of the architecture at all, or the way we've captured it, it's giving an answer that I don't agree with. So therefore it's wrong and I need to tweak something. So that's what I'd do if it got bundled. All right. Okay.
Great.
Well, grab the template, hack it, use it, give me any feedback. If anybody wants to work with me on it, I would love some help. Otherwise, I probably will go back and spend a lot more tokens on Claude and keep working on my own. I think this, I think this is a problem and an opportunity. I think it's a problem because there's no detail and people now think this is an architecture. And again, I have a strong opinion that it is not an architecture, but it's done great branding for the value of layered architectures. And we just need to solve that problem. So this is my attempt at doing that. So let me know if there's any value in it.
Shane, thanks so much. Thanks, I really appreciate it. Thanks, everybody. We'll certainly open it up and on the LinkedIn post, we'll certainly present a lot more exposure to this, and then also to the demo community members.